The first thing I noticed about the woods in northern Michigan was how quiet they were. Not peaceful quiet, heavy quiet. The kind that makes you aware of every small sound your own body creates. The crunch of gravel under your boots, the slow pull of breath in your lungs, the faint rustle of your jacket sleeve when you move your arm. I had come up to the edge of Manistee National Forest to spend a few days alone, just me, a rented cabin, and miles of pine forest that stretched farther than the eye could see. The road to the place was barely paved. It wound through tall black pines and thick undergrowth before ending at a clearing where the cabin sat curved against the tree line, like it had grown there instead of being built. The owner had left the key under a rusted lantern on the porch. No neighbors, no cell service, no lights except the ones you brought with you. Exactly what I wanted. At least that's what I thought when I arrived. The first evening passed quietly. I unpacked my gear, stacked firewood by the small iron stove, and stepped outside just before sunset to watch the lights. The forest looked endless from the clearing, dark trunks standing shoulder to shoulder like pillars in a cathedral. And somewhere deep inside the forest, something howled. It wasn't unusual. Wolves still lived in parts of Michigan, and coyotes were everywhere. But this sound wasn't either of those. It started low, then rose sharply, then broke apart into something that sounded disturbingly human, like a scream stretched too long. The sound rolled across the trees and echoed through the clearing before dying away. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The woods went silent again, too silent. No crickets, no birds, nothing. Eventually I shook it off and went back inside. But when night settled over the forest, I noticed something strange. The cabin had 3 windows facing the birds, and sometime after midnight, I realized something out there was standing just beyond the trees, watching the cabin, watching me, and it was tall, too tall to be a wolf. I didn't move from the window for a long time. At first I told myself it was just a trick of the dark. The forest beyond the clearing was thick and the branches tethered in strange ways. When moonlight filtered through them, shapes appeared where nothing actually stood. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. Something was there, not moving, not pacing like a curious animal, just standing. The cabin window reflected the dim glow of the lantern behind me, so I leaned closer to the glass and turned slightly to cut the reflection. That's when the shape shifted, not forward, not sideways, up. The silhouette straightened, unfolding slowly from a hunched posture until it was standing fully upright between 2 pine trunks. My breath stopped. No wolf stood like that. No deer, no bear. The figure was tall enough that its head brushed the lower branches, easily 7 feet, maybe more. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, long arms hanging down at its sides. But the outline of the head was wrong, pointed, angular, like the sharp wedge of a wolf's skull. The moon slipped through a gap in the clouds then, washing the clearing in pale silver light for a brief moment, and 2 eyes reflected it, bright, amber, not glowing exactly, but reflecting light in a way that felt unnervingly focused, as if those eyes weren't simply catching the moonlight, they were directing it, staring straight through the glass, at me. I stumbled backward from the window, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct screamed the same thing: predator. But predators didn't stand upright. They didn't remain perfectly still for minutes at a time like statues carved into the forest. I grabbed the lantern from the table and stepped back toward the window again, raising the light slightly. The beam reached the edge of the clearing. For half a second it illuminated fur, dark, coarse, covering a chest that rose and fell slowly with steady breaths. Then the thing moved, not away, close. One long step carried it from the shadow of the trees to the edge of the clearing, and now I could see it clearly. The body was massive, thick muscles moving beneath black fur, arms hanging too long, fingers ending in curved claws that glinted faintly in the lantern light. But the head was unmistakably a wolf's. Long muzzle, sharp eye ears, teeth partially visible even when the mouth was closed. Except the creature wasn't walking on four legs. It stood balanced easily on two, like a man. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the creature tilted its head slightly to one side, studying me the way a person might examine something unfamiliar, something new. And deep in the woods behind it, another howl began. The same terrible sound I had heard earlier, low at first, then rising into that stretched, human-like scream. The creature outside the cabin didn't join the call. It didn't react at all. It just kept staring through the window at me, as if deciding something. Then slowly, it smiled. The moment its lips pulled back, I understood something instinctively. This wasn't an animal. Animals show teeth when they're threatened or ready to attack. It's a flash, a warning, a reflex born from instinct. But what I saw in that clearing wasn't a reflex. It was deliberate. The creature's mouth stretched wider than a wolf's ever could, revealing rows of long, uneven teeth that caught the lantern light. The expression looked wrong on its face, almost practiced, like it had seen the gesture somewhere before and was mimicking it without fully understanding what it meant. And those amber eyes never left mine. My hand trembled so badly the lantern glass rattled. For a few seconds the two of us just stood there, locked in that strange moment across the clearing. The forest remained silent behind it, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then the creature moved again, not toward the cabin, around it. It stepped sideways into the clearing, long legs carrying it easily across the grass with slow, deliberate strides. The way it moved sent a shiver through my spine. Its gait wasn't entirely human, and it wasn't animal either. It was something in between. Each step was smooth but slightly exaggerated, as though it had learned to walk upright later in life and was still adjusting to the mechanics of it. The lantern light caught its full frame now. The creature was enormous. Its shoulders were broader than the door frame of the cabin, its arms hanging low enough that the claws nearly brushed its knees. Thick black fur covered most of its body, but the chest looked lighter in color, a grayish patch that rose and fell slowly with each breath. And the smell reached me even though through the window, a soul, wild odor, wet fur, earth, something older, something feral. It circled the clearing once, slowly, its head turning as it studied the cabin from different angles. At one point it stopped near the woodpile beside the porch. One long claw reached down. The sound of wood splitting echoed softly as the creature dragged its claws across the stacked logs, not attacking, testing, marking. A deep unease settled into my stomach. This thing wasn't acting like a predator that had just found prey. It was acting like something inspecting property. Then the creature straightened again and turned its head toward the deeper woods. For a moment I thought it might leave, but instead it raised its muzzle slightly toward the dark canopy above the trees, and it screamed. The sound exploded through the clearing with such force that the window glass rattled. It started as a wolf's howl, long and sharp, but halfway through it twisted into something horrifyingly human, a scream of rage, of pain, of something ancient. The sound seemed to echo for miles through the forest, and then something answered, far away, deeper in the woods, another howl, and another, not one, not two, many. My stomach dropped. The creature lowered its head slowly after the call, those amber eyes sliding back to the window, back to me, and for the first time that night, I realized something much worse than the fact that the Michigan Dogman existed. This one wasn't alone. The answering howls rolled through the forest like distant thunder, one from the north, another from somewhere deeper behind the cabin, then one farther west, echoing faintly through the pines. Each cry rose and fell in that same horrible way, starting as the howl of a wolf before twisting into something that sounded disturbingly human. The creature in the clearing stood motionless as the sound spread through the woods, listening, waiting. Those amber eyes flicked toward the darkness between the trees as if tracking each distant voice. Then it looked back at me, and something changed in its posture. The inspection was over. The thing stepped closer to the cabin, my breath caught in my throat. The distance between us shrank quickly now. One long stride, then another. Its claws pressed into the soil with a soft crunch as it crossed the last few yards of the clearing. I stumbled backward from the window, nearly knocking the lantern off the table. The wooden floor creaked beneath my boots as I retreated toward the center of the cabin, heart pounding so violently it made my ears ring. For a moment I didn't see the creature anymore, only the dark square of the window. Then a shadow rose slowly across the glass. The top of a pointed ear appeared first, then the curve of its skull, then those eyes. It had walked right up to the cabin, standing just outside the wall. The creature's face filled the window now. Up close, the details were worse. The fur along its muzzle was matted and uneven, dark streaks running down from the corners of its mouth. Its nostrils flared slowly as it breathed in through the glass, fogging the window with warm vapor. It was smelling the air inside, smelling me. One long claw lifted and tapped lightly against the wooden sliding beside the window. Tap, tap, tap. Not striking, not scratching, testing. The deliberate patience of movement chilled me more than any attack could have, because whatever stood outside the cabin wasn't rushing. It wasn't desperate, it was calm, confident. Then the creature leaned closer to the glass. Its nose nearly touched the pane. The lantern light illuminated the inside of its mouth as it parted its jaws slightly, revealing long, yellowed teeth and a dark tongue curling slowly behind them. The eyes narrowed, studying me, memorizing me. Then the creature turned its head sharply toward the forest again. Another howl echoed through the night, close this time, much closer. The dogman straightened, its posture shifted, alert now, expectant. And then suddenly I understood. The calls I'd heard earlier, they weren't warnings, they were signals, and whatever was coming through those woods toward the cabin was coming to join it. The forest answered again. This time the howl came from somewhere behind the cabin, much closer than before. The creature outside the window lifted its head slightly, ears twitching as it listened. Its amber eyes slid away from me for the first time since it had approached the cabin. For a moment I thought it might leave. Instead, it stepped back from the window, not retreating, making space. The silhouette moved across the porch slowly, its claws scraping faintly against the wooden boards. I crept toward the opposite window, moving as quietly as I could, my pulse roaring in my ears. When I looked out toward the tree line behind the cabin, the darkness there had changed. The forest wasn't still anymore. Branches shifted, pine needles trembled. Something large was moving behind the trunks. Then another shape emerged. At first it looked like a shadow peeling itself away from the trees, but as it stepped closer to the edge of the clearing, the moonlight revealed the same towering form I had just seen outside the window. Another one. This one was even bigger. Its fur looked lighter, a dull gray that blended perfectly with the pale fog rolling across the ground. It moved with a smooth confidence that made the first creature seem almost cautious by comparison. The two of them faced each other across the yard. For a few seconds they stood perfectly still. Then the gray one dropped briefly onto all fours and sniffed the ground where the first creature had walked. When it rose again, its head turned toward the cabin, toward me. I felt the blood drain from my face. Now there were two pairs of eyes staring at the house, two towering shapes standing upright in the clearing like sentries. And the woods were still moving. Farther back among the pines, more branches shifted, more shadows passed between the trees. The first creature, the one that had approached the window, let out a low rumbling growl, not loud, but deep enough that I felt a vibration through the cabin floor. It wasn't threatening. It sounded almost conversational. The gray one answered with a shorter growl of its own. Then both of them turned their heads toward the darker part of the forest behind the clearing. Another howl rose in the distance, and this one was answered immediately by several others. The sound spread through the woods like a chain reaction. My stomach twisted. They weren't gathering by accident. This was coordination, a meeting. The two creatures in the clearing began to move slowly now, circling the cabin from opposite sides. Their long strides carried them easily through the glass, claws leaving deep marks in the soil. They weren't rushing, they were positioning themselves. One moved past the wood pile. The other drifted toward the side of the house where the bedroom window faced the trees. And beyond them, in the darkness of the forest, I saw something that made my hands start shaking again. More eyes, low at first, then rising higher as their owners stepped forward from the shadows. Amber reflections blinking into existence one by one between the trees. 3, 4, 5, maybe more, watching the cabin, watching me, and slowly, silently, the pack began to surround the clearing. The clearing was no longer empty. At first it had been just the one creature, then two. Now the tree line itself seemed alive with movement. Amber eyes glimmered between the trunks like distant lanterns. Some were low to the ground, some higher, and a few rose slowly upward as their owners stood onto two legs. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. By the time I reached 6, I stopped counting, because more were still appearing. The forest was releasing them. They stepped out from the darkness in slow, deliberate movements, massive shapes unfolding from shadow, shoulders brushing against pine branches as they crossed into the open clearing. Some walked upright like the first creature. Others moved on all fours for a few seconds, rising again, their spines stretching and straightening until they towered over the grass. The gray one near the back of the clearing lifted its head and let out a low rumbling call. Not the scream I had heard before, something quieter, shorter. The response came immediately. The other creatures shifted positions, drifting closer to the edges of the yard in an uneven circle. They were organizing. The cabin lights must have looked like a beacon in the darkness, because every pair of eyes seemed locked onto the same point now, the windows, and behind them, me. My legs felt weak as I stepped away from the glass again. The lantern flame flickered as I moved past it, throwing long shadows across the wooden walls. The cabin suddenly felt smaller than it had when I arrived. Thin boards and old nails separating me from whatever had gathered outside. One of the creatures reached the woodpile again. I heard the crack of timber as a claw dug into one of the stacked logs and lifted it slightly before letting it drop back down. Another shape drifted across the yard toward the back wall of the cabin. Its claws brushed against the siding. Scratch. The sound dragged slowly across the wood, not violent, intentional, marking. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move quietly toward the back window. When I looked out, the gray one stood only 20 feet away now. Up close, it looked even larger than before. Its chest was broad enough to block most of the moonlight behind it, and the thick fur along its shoulders bristled in the faint breeze. But what held my attention were its eyes. They weren't just watching randomly like animals scanning for prey. They were focused, strategic. The gray creature turned its head slowly toward the others scattered around the clearing. For a moment, they all stood completely still. Then the gray one did something that made my blood run cold. It lifted one long arm and pointed directly at the cabin. The creatures began moving again immediately. Two drifted closer to the porch. Another crossed the clearing toward the side wall. The first dogman, the one that had smiled through the window, stepped back into view near the front of the cabin. Its amber eyes met mine through the glass again, and slowly, very slowly, it reached out and wrapped its claws around the edge of the porch railing, testing the strength of the wood. Behind it, the rest of the pack closed in, the circle around the cabin tightening one careful step at a time. The wood creaked under its weight. That was the first sound, a slow, complaining groan from the porch boards as the creature leaned its massive frame against the railing. The claws wrapped around the old timber like hooks, digging slightly into the grain. The porch had probably been built 30 years ago, maybe longer. It wasn't meant to hold something like that. The creature shifted its weight slightly, testing the structure. The railing bowed inward a fraction of an inch before settling again. My heart was hammering so violently I felt like the entire cabin could hear it. Outside, the rest of the pack continued their slow movement around the clearing. They weren't rushing, they weren't charging, they were patient. One of them crossed in front of the truck I had parked near the edge of the yard. Its back brushed against the hood as it passed, leaving a long smear of dark fur across the metal. Another drifted toward the rear corner of the cabin and stopped there, towering against the wall like a living shadow. They were sealing the exits. The gray one, the larger one that seemed to command the others, stepped closer to the center of the clearing. It stood upright now, its massive chest rising slowly as it inhaled the cold night air. Then its head tilted slightly toward the porch, toward the one testing the railing. A low rumble rolled from its throat, a signal. The creature on the porch responded immediately. It climbed the steps, not like a wolf, not like any animal I'd ever seen. It used the railing the way a person might, gripping the wood with one hand while stepping up onto the boards with deliberate, careful movements. The porch sagged under its full weight when it reached the top. The boards groaned again. Now it stood directly in front of the cabin door. The old wooden door suddenly looked very thin, very fragile. The creature leaned down slightly and sniffled along the frame. Its nostrils flared at it as it breathed in the scent of the cabin interior, the scent of me. Its claws dragged softly across the door, not striking, just feeling the surface. Scratch. The sound scraped down the wood slowly, leaving 4 long gouges that ran almost the full height of the door. My legs refused to move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The back door would lead straight into the woods, straight into the rest of the pack. Outside, the gray one lifted its head again, and this time it released a low, steady howl that vibrated through the clearing. The others answered almost immediately, shorter calls, sharp barks, deep growls. The porch creature stopped scratching the door and turned its head toward the clearing, listening. Then it looked back at the door again, at that thin barrier between us, and slowly it lifted one massive claw, positioning it directly over the handle. The claw hovered over the handle. For a moment it didn't move, just hung there, inches above the brass knob like the creature was studying it, trying to understand what the small metal piece was meant to do. Then the claw lowered slowly. The tip brushed the handle. The metal clicked softly. My lungs locked. The creature twisted its wrist slightly, testing the movement. The knob turned a fraction of an inch. The old door rattled in its frame. A sharp growl escaped in the thing's throat, as if the mechanism had surprised it. Behind the cabin, one of the others barked in response, short, alert. The creature on the porch froze again, listening to the pack. Then it tried the handle once more. This time it turned farther. The latch inside the door shifted with a dull, metallic sound. Click. The door didn't open. I had locked it earlier without thinking, sliding the heavy iron bolt across the inside frame. For a few seconds the creature stood there motionless. Then its nose pressed against the wood beside the knob, sniffing. The boards creaked again as it leaned closer. I could hear its breathing now through the window. Slow, deep. The kind of breathing something large makes when it's calm and confident. Outside in the clearing, the pack had grown restless. Several of them were pacing along the edge of the yard now, their long silhouettes weaving between the pale beams of moonlight. The gray one stepped forward again, closer to the porch. Its amber eyes flicked between the door and the surrounding forest as if it was measuring the moment carefully. Then it raised its muzzle and let out another of those terrible cries. The sound burst across the clearing like a siren. The porch creature reacted instantly. The patience vanished. Its claws slammed into the door with a violent crack. The entire frame shook. Wood splintered where the claws struck, carving deep grooves across the surface. My heart nearly stopped. Another blow followed, this one harder. The door groaned as the hinges rattled against the wall. Outside, the rest of the pack erupted into noise, growls, barks, those awful half-human howls echoing between the trees. The creature on the porch stepped back once, lowering its shoulders like an animal preparing to charge. The boards beneath its feet creaked dangerously. Then it slammed forward again. The impact shook the entire cabin. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams. A crack split across the center of the door through the jagged line in the window. I saw amber light, one glowing eye staring through the broken boards, watching me. And then something even worse happened. Behind the cabin, the back will began to scratch. The scratching started softly. At first it sounded like branches brushing against the siding, a slow drag across the wood. Scratch. I turned my head slowly toward the back of the cabin. The sound came again, longer this time, deeper. 4 distinct lines being carved down the boards. Scratch. Something out there was running in the claws along the wall. Not attacking, just tracing. Testing the structure the same way the first creature had tested the porch railing. The dogman outside the front door paused after its last blow. The cracked boards shifted slightly as it leaned closer again, pressing its snout against the damaged wood. It could hear the scratching too. All of them could. The pack outside had gone quiet again. The sudden silence was worse than the noise, because now I could hear everything. The slow breathing through the broken door, the faint creak of boards beneath the creature's weight on the porch, and the thing behind the cabin. Stomach. Scratch. The claws dragged slowly down the rear wall again, then stopped. For a few seconds nothing moved, then the back window darkened. A massive shape rose outside the glass, the gray one. Up close, its size was even more terrifying than before. Its shoulders filled the entire window frame, thick fur brushing against the glass as it leaned forward. The moonlight caught the long bridge of its muzzle and the jagged outline of its teeth. Its nose touched the window. Fog bloomed across the glass as it exhaled. Those amber eyes slid sideways, looking past the reflection, finding me inside the cabin. For a moment, the gray creature and the one at the porch stared at each other through the house. 2 predators positioned on opposite sides of their prey, and the gray one did something strange. It lifted its claw slowly and tapped the glass. Once. A dull knock echoed through the room. Tap. The porch creature responded with a deep rumble in its chest, not anger, something closer to anticipation. The gray one tapped the window again. Tap, tap, tap. Then its claw slid downward across the glass with a long, squealing scrape. The window shuddered in its frame. Outside, the rest of the pack shifted positions again. Their shadows moved along the edges of the clearing, circling the cabin in widening arcs, coordinating, hunting. The creature on the porch pulled its head back from the broken door. The amber eye vanished from the crack in the wood. For a moment, I thought it might retreat. Instead, the boards creaked loudly as it stepped back across the porch, preparing for another charge. Behind me, the gray creature leaned closer to the window. Its teeth parted slightly and it began to make a sound, not a howl, not a growl, something softer, a low, eerie chuckle that vibrated through the glass like distant thunder. Then both creatures moved at the same time. The one outside the door lunged forward, and the one behind the cabin slammed its claws into the window. The glass exploded inward. The sound was like a gunshot inside the cabin. Shards sprayed across the wooden floor as the gray creature's claws tore the window frame. Splinters of wood and broken glass rained down around me while the heavy curtains ripped free from their hooks. I stumbled backward, raising my arms instinctively as the jagged pieces scattered across the room. Cold night air rushed in through the shattered window, and with it came the smell. Wet fur, dirt, rotting leaves. The gray dogman forced its arm through the opening, claws scraping against the interior wall as it reached blindly into the cabin. The limb was enormous. Thick black fur covered the forearm, muscles shifting beneath the coat as the claws slashed through the air, searching. I drove sideways behind the kitchen table just as the claws swept across the space where I had been standing. The wood of the wall splintered as they struck it. Behind me, the front door shuddered again. The creature on the porch had changed once more. The cracked boards finally gave way with a sharp snap as one of the hinges tore loose from the frame. The door burst open halfway, hanging crooked in its hinges. Through the gap, I saw the towering silhouette of the first dogman standing on the porch, its massive shoulders blocking the moonlight behind it. The creature pushed against the broken door slowly, testing the opening. Meanwhile, the gray one off at the window forced its head through the shattered frame. Glass crunched under its weight as it leaned forward, its muzzle sweeping from side to side while it smirched the moon. The amber eyes found the lantern, the flame reflected in them like twin sparks. For a moment the creature seemed fascinated by the light, then its gaze dropped lower, toward the table, toward me. I held my breath. The claws inside the cabin scraped across the floorboards as the creature dragged its arm farther inside. The nails struck the leg of the table. Tap, tap, then they curled around it. The entire table jerked sideways as the creature yanked. I drove away just as the heavy wood scraped across the floor and crashed into the wall. The gray dogman snarled, a deep, guttural sound that rattled the broken glass still clinging to the frame. Behind me, the front door burst fully open. The porch creature stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath its weight as it entered the cabin. Now there were two of them inside. One halfway through the window, one towering just beyond the doorway, both turning slowly, both surging, and outside, the rest of the pack began to howl again. The howls outside was deafening now. It wasn't just one or two distant calls anymore. The forest erupted into a chorus of growls, barks, and those twisted, human-like screams that pierced the night like jagged glass. Each sound seemed to bounce off the trees, echoing into the clearing, shaking the cabin to its core. Inside, the two dogmen moved with terrifying coordination. The gray one dragged itself fully through the broken window, landing heavily on the wooden floor. Its claws scraped across the boards as it straightened, muscles rippling beneath the dark fur. Its amber eyes never left mine, and I could feel its focus, cold and calculating. The first creature stepped fully inside, nudging the broken door closed with one massive shoulder. The hinges groaned under the weight, but the door didn't swing open. Not yet. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a tool. The dogman studied it, tilting its head in a way that made my skin crawl. I backed toward the corner of the room, my legs trembling, trying to make myself smaller, invisible, but they didn't care. They weren't hunting in the traditional sense. Their movements were deliberate, slow, almost ritualistic. It was as if they were assessing me, mirroring me, cataloging everything about my presence. The gray one stepped closer, each movement careful, deliberate. Its claws dragged along the floor, leaving deep gouges in the wood. The creature paused, cocked its head slightly, and let out a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the room. Then, in a motion too fast to follow fully, it lunged toward the side table where I had been leaning moments ago. I dove aside, just in time as its massive paw crashed down, sending books, papers, and debris scattering across the floor. The amber eyes fixed on me again. The guttural rumble became a low growl, almost like a wordless warning. And that's when I realized the forest outside wasn't just observing anymore. The entire pack had gathered at the edges of the clearing. The howls and barks weren't random, they were signals, commands, alerts. Every movement of the dogman inside the cabin was mirrored outside, a coordinated dance of predators surrounding their prey. There was no escape, not through the window, not the door, not into the darkness of the woods outside. I was trapped, completely, and I was about to understand just how patient and relentless the Michigan Dogman really was. The room felt impossibly small now. Every sound seemed magnified, the scraping of claws against wood, the groan of the splintered floorboards, the rasp of fire brushing against furniture. The lantern flickered weakly in the corner, casting long, jittering shadows that merged with the black shapes of the dogman. The gray one stepped closer, its massive chest rising and falling with each deliberate breath. Its amber eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, unblinking, calculating. It tilted its head toward me and exhaled slowly, fog blooming across the cracked window behind it. That single breath carried the weight of the forest, the smell of wet earth, decaying leaves, and a predator. Then the creature made a low, almost conversational rumble. The perched dogman responded with a short, sharp growl. Outside, the rest of the pack echoed the sounds in a haunting chorus, each howl and bark perfectly synchronized, surrounding the cabin in a ring of sound and intent. I pressed myself against the far wall, legs waiting, legs trembling. My mind raced, trying to find a plan, but the truth was undeniable. The cabin offered no sanctuary. Every exit was blocked, every move watched. The creatures weren't just hunting, they were studying, strategizing. They knew the layout, they knew my position, and they were patient enough to wait me out. The gray dogman lowered its massive head closer to mine, claws scraping softly against the floor. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I could hear the intelligence there. Something that wasn't animal, something ancient, something human-like. Then, without warning, it stepped back slightly and let out a scream, a piercing, bone-chilling sound that combined the growl and the howl of a wolf with the agonized shriek of a human. The sound vibrated through the walls, rattling the lantern, shaking the floor, echoing into the trees outside. The howl outside answered immediately, and then another and another. The pack was calling to each other, assembling, coordinating. I realized in that moment, with my heart pounding and my body frozen in fear, that whatever was coming next wouldn't just be the two inside. The Michigan Dogman had brought its full force, and there was no escaping what the force had sent.